Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 21st of August. I'm Erin Viner, and this is IBA News broadcasting from Jerusalem. We open with the situation along the northern border with Syria. The Israeli Air Force launched strikes at an Islamic Jihad terror cell inside the Arab Republic this morning, identified as responsible for the firing of rockets into Israel yesterday afternoon. The IDF reported that 5 terrorists inside of a vehicle were killed during the operation that was carried out in territory controlled by the Syrian army about 15 kilometers from the two countries' shared border. Today's strike is the latest in a series of Israeli raids that began yesterday against Syrian military posts in the border area in retaliation for the firing of rockets from Syria into northern Israel. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that despite the clashes, Israel has no interest in any escalation, although he stressed that the policy of retaliation for attacks against Israeli civilians remains intact. He went on to say that those who were quick to embrace Iran following last month's signing of the nuclear deal should be very aware that it was an Iranian commander who directed and backed the cell that attacked Israel yesterday. Defense Minister Moshe Ya'alon said that the strike against the terrorists re-emphasizes Israel's refusal to tolerate any attempts to harm the security of its citizens. The Islamic Jihad is so far denying involvement in the cross-border attacks and has called an urgent meeting to discuss the targeting of its cell. Turning to the battle over congressional approval of the Iranian nuclear deal, and U.S. President Barack Obama is promising Democratic lawmakers that Washington will continue to keep economic pressure on Tehran, as well as keep military options open, even if the deal does go through. In a letter addressed to New York's Democratic Representative Gerald Nadler, Obama wrote that sanctions targeting Iran's non-nuclear activities will be upheld, including its support of Lebanon's Hezbollah organization, as well as against what he referred to as Iran's destabilizing role in Yemen. He then went on to underscore American support for Israel, saying that he views the country's security as sacrosanct and that he is committed to deepening missile defense funding and other bilateral military cooperation. He sent the letter while in the middle of his annual 2-week family vacation, during which he has privately been reaching out to Democrats in his campaign to boost support for the deal. Congress is set to vote on the issue next month in a resolution of disapproval against the accord, which seeks to curb Iran's nuclear program in exchange for billions of dollars in sanctions relief. If passed, the president is expected to exercise his veto power, and White House officials and Democratic lawmakers say that they're confident that there is enough support in the party to block any Republican override efforts. Obama has picked up support from Democrats in recent days, including Senator Claire McCaskill, who yesterday said that while the agreement is not perfect, it's clear to her that the world is united behind the agreement with the exception of the Israeli government. The United Kingdom is preparing to reopen its embassy in Iran this Sunday. Reuters is reporting that British Foreign Secretary Philip Hammond will travel to Tehran for the ceremony at the diplomatic compound, which has been closed since it came under attack in 2011 by local hardliners in the Islamic Republic to protest the imposition of international sanctions. The nuclear deal that Iran signed with world powers, including Britain, has helped to accelerate a thaw in political and economic relations. The last time that a British Foreign Secretary visited Tehran was in 2003. Here at home, the security establishment is continuing to closely monitor the condition of Palestinian prisoner Mohammed Alan. After 65 days without food, the suspected Islamic Jihad terrorist has officially ended his hunger strike and is now improving with the intravenous delivery of vitamins and minerals, but has yet to consume food normally. After regaining consciousness yesterday, he was reportedly able to resume communications and was informed of the High Court's decision to temporarily freeze his administrative detention and to keep him at Ashkelon's Barzilai Hospital for further treatment. If Alan is determined to have suffered irreversible brain damage, the administrative detention order will be revoked altogether. If and when his condition stabilizes, he may request permission to be moved to a different hospital. Amid concerns that any deterioration in Alan's condition could provoke revenge rocket fire from the Gaza Strip, the IDF deployed 2 Iron Dome missile defense systems yesterday to the south of the country, with one placed in Ashdod and the other in Beersheba. In other news, Palestinian disturbances broke out in scattered locations across the West Bank throughout the day today. Rioters hurled rocks at security forces who responded with crowd dispersal methods. No injuries have been reported in the clashes, which have been taking place in the Palestinian villages of Anabta, Kfar Kadum, Nebi Salah and the Jalazun refugee camp. In a decision that could have major repercussions on sports in the country, the National Labor Court has banned the playing of all Second Division National League soccer games on the Sabbath. The ruling follows the filing of a petition from hundreds of professional soccer players requesting that the action be taken. The judge ruled that team members cannot be forced to play on Shabbat and that no matches will be held during the hours of the Sabbath until the sides meet in court again on the 7th of September in further efforts to resolve the dispute. The first game to be affected by the face-off is the face-off between Ashdod and Lod, slated for tomorrow, that will now be rescheduled to another date. While most of the league games have always been played during the week, senior league officials recently plan to hold the main match between the rounds on Saturday afternoons. For now, the decision will not impact Premier League games, some of which are played on the Sabbath, including tomorrow's season opener between defending league champions Maccabi Tel Aviv and Bnei Sachnin. Joining me now in the studio to discuss this week's diplomatic and economic events is senior correspondent for Bloomberg Israel, Kalev Ben David. Hi, Kalev. Thank you for coming in this afternoon.
Pleasure to be here, Erin, as always.
All right, let's start with what's been happening on the northern border. How significant are these clashes in your view?
Well, I think there is some significance, especially in the Israel's highlighting of the fact that it was an Iranian officer or an Iranian order in order to fire these rockets into the Golan. I mean, there's a couple of factors at play here. Of course, we have the whole background of Israel trying to point out this Iran nuclear agreement does nothing to curtail Israel's sponsorship of terrorist organizations, some such as Islamic Jihad. We also know that last week, according to reports, the IDF had a military exercise which included a scenario in which Israel actually crosses the Syrian border and takes control of the Syrian side of the Golan Heights. That's over concern that Islamic Jihad and Hezbollah are building a sort of a border area that could serve as a striking ground. So that's the backdrop of this. And of course, there is concern. You mentioned that the hunger striker, the Islamic Jihad hunger striker, concern if he had died, that would have led to an escalation, and that could have been, that whole incident could have been the background for these attacks by Islamic Jihad.
What do you make of the motivation of Iran's involvement at this time? Of course, as you mentioned, Iran's long been the leading state sponsor of terrorism, and it's long backed Hezbollah and other groups, other terror groups. What do you make of speculation that Iran might have kept a lower profile and instead is right now flouting its involvement at the West?
Yeah, you're trying to bring a kind of Western logic to the Iranians and the Iranian government, and I don't think it works like that. I mean, Islamic Jihad is controlled by the Iranian Revolutionary Guards. I mean, they function almost as a sort of separate government within Iran. I mean, they don't. It's a mistake to link their behavior and say, okay, well, why would the the Revolutionary Guards acting up now when Iran is reopening relations with the West? And that's because, again, the more extremist elements in Iran, like the Revolutionary Guards, they don't take orders from the president. They only answer to the supreme leader. Right. And even then, it's not clear in terms of they almost function separately. And it's almost a statement, I think, quite the opposite, maybe, in the sense that they could be making a statement that do not make the mistake for Israel, that we are going to be constrained by the fact that there'll be new relations with the UK, for example, that's going to restrain our activities against Israel, be it in southern Syria or South Lebanon, or sponsorship of Iranian-backed groups in the Gaza Strip.
All right, now let's talk about the congressional vote that's coming up in September about the Iranian nuclear deal. What do you make of President Obama's efforts so far to garner support?
You know, it's interesting, Erin, because I've been speaking with some of these congressmen that have been coming here. We've had major congressional delegations, a few dozen, both from the Republicans and from the Democrats, brought here on a pre-scheduled AIPAC trip, and I spoke quite extensively with both groups. The Republicans at least claim that they are confident that they have a chance to override that presidential veto. And I did speak to several Democrats that have not publicly declared yet, but have said that they are they are leaning toward voting against it, and including overriding a veto. However, and the Democrats don't want to appear overconfident. I mean, they're being more non-committal. I think the exception in Congress has been Nancy Pelosi, who's come out and said we can do it. But I think it's going to be close. And I'm not I'm not talking about the initial vote. That clearly President Obama is going to lose to the Republican majorities. I think the override that vote on the override is going to be close, but it's going to be difficult for an override of a presidential veto. I think even Democrats that don't like this agreement, some of them are just simply, when it comes down to it, are going to say, listen, do we want to damage a Democrat president in the White House, especially during an election season? It might be different, but during an election season, that they're going to do this to a Democrat incumbent in the White House, possibly hurt the chances of of Obama's successor, be it Hillary Clinton, otherwise. So I think at the end of the day, it's going to be close, but he'll probably be able to override that veto. I mean, I'm sorry, the veto will stand. There will not be an override.
That's what it kind of looks like. All right, now let me ask you, okay, you just heard the statements that Obama wrote to New York's Representative Nadler about, despite the, the discord, the public discord in Israel standing so staunchly against him in such a major policy decision, it's not going to affect the long-term relationship between Washington and Jerusalem. Are you buying that argument? I mean, is Israel endangering the help that it may need to battle all the extremists here on our borders?
Well, that is an argument that you hear from, I don't know, long-term, but you are hearing that openly from some American officials, including Ambassador Dan Shapiro, who has, I think more than once, has said that, hey, we're offering Israel extra aid now, and the Prime Minister's office is refusing to take it, and they could be missing an opportunity. Prime Minister's office, off the record, is saying that, listen, let's first determine whether this agreement is stand or not, and then we'll discuss it. So that is the argument some of the Americans are going to be making. Personally, I don't think so. I mean, keep a couple of things in mind. First of all, like I said, we have an election. We have a Republican, could be a Republican who comes into office, will bring a totally, obviously different approach, or even a Democrat like Hillary Clinton or some of the other people that have been mentioned. So I don't know I'm skeptical of those people that say, oh, this is permanently damaged. I don't think so. I think we're seeing Israel's strength in the Congress right now with even this debate that's going on about the Iran deal. I would say this, though. I mean, it has, in a sense, poisoned some of the waters. I mean, I think there is some damage here. I don't think it's necessarily at the core issue, the core security cooperation or political cooperation, especially between Israel and the Congress and Israel's security establishment. But I think the public discourse in the United States this has, in a sense, hurt Israel in that degree and raised these issues again of to what degree does the U.S. owe to Israel and its security? And I think that's uncomfortable questions at any time for Israeli to hear in a U.S. public discourse.
Okay, we have time for one last quick question, and that is close to home. You and I have both lived in this city for decades. And what are we seeing right now with these Shabbat wars? I mean, first we're seeing all of these renewed violence against the opening of the Yes Planet Cinema complex, prompting the mayor to now close mini markets on the Sabbath in the center of town. Now we're seeing this effect on sports. They're going to cancel second league, soccer games. Is this the end of the line for the secular public?
No, I would definitely not. I would definitely differentiate with the soccer issue. Remember, that's the National Labor Court, not the religious courts, that are saying that they shouldn't have to play in Shabbat. And there's a long-standing policy in the government and in the courts that people Israeli Jews who don't want to work on Shabbat should not be forced to. This has happened before in some of the stores that are open on Shabbat, not in the Jerusalem area, of course, but on some of the kibbutzim. If you go to movie theaters or Cinematheque in Jerusalem, you will often see that they'll have their non-Jewish employees sometimes working there, for example. So the soccer issue is another issue. Regarding this, look, I covered as a young journalist for the Jerusalem Post in the late 1980s, the so-called Shabbat wars over the first opening of the cinemas. Those were huge events, giant rallies, protests. At the theaters, really what's happening now, I think, is shows you that, in a sense, that in the certain area, in terms of at least cultural events, the Haredim did lose that war. They continue to. We have things like the Tachana, the old railway station, which is open on Shabbat. So there is still plenty more now today for the secular public to do on Shabbat than at any time in the history of in the city, basically, since the state started. So I don't know if that
Well,
trend will continue, but I think there's still plenty to do.
I enjoyed your coverage at that time. I still like hearing what you have to say. Caleb, thanks for coming in this afternoon.
Thanks, Erin. Shabbat Shalom to you and to all the viewers.
In other news, immediately before beginning radiation treatment for small cancerous spots on his brain, former U.S. President Jimmy Carter appeared to be upbeat. He openly discussed his condition at a press conference, saying that he's at ease with whatever comes. When asked by a reporter what he would most like to see before the end of his life, Carter replied, "Peace for Israel and her neighbors."
That's been the top priority of my foreign policy projects for the last 30 years. Right now, I think the prospects are more dismal than any time I remember in the last 50 years. It's practically, the whole process is practically dormant. The government of Israel has no desire for a two-state solution, which is the policy of all the other nations in the world. And the United States has practically no influence compared to past years in either Israel or Palestine. So I feel very discouraged about it, but that would be my number one foreign policy hope.
Following a court-ordered psychiatric evaluation, Yishai Shlisal has been ordered to stand trial on charges of killing 16-year-old Shira Banki and injuring 5 others during a stabbing attack at the annual Gay Pride Parade in the capital last month. A Jerusalem magistrates court judge also extended the suspect's remand by 5 days, during which time the prosecution will continue to prepare his indictment. Shlisal spoke defiantly during yesterday's hearing, saying that anyone marching in the Jerusalem Pride Parade is fighting against the Almighty and have lost their right to complain. Well, it's gone. The destruction of one of the most iconic landmarks in Tel Aviv is no more, with the demolition of the Ma'ariv Bridge at dawn this morning. At the end of a countdown, Minister of Transportation Israel Katz pushed the button, which triggered a massive controlled explosion that brought down the structure within seconds before a large crowd of onlookers standing on special spectator platforms erected a safe distance away. The area is now cleared to build the first line of the city's new light rail in place of the overpass, which was built in 1976 and formerly occupied by the Ma'ariv newspaper until 2012. And according to our Tel Aviv-based editor, Efrat Batat, many of those attending today's controlled explosion at the bridge said it was a blast. Well, more than 20,000 people raised their goblets in Jerusalem this week at the nation's largest wine festival. Wine and food critic David Rhodes discussed the evolution of the industry here in the country with IBA's Aryeh O'Sullivan.
We're here with David Rhodes, the Israeli wine guy. David, why are you called the Israeli wine guy?
Well, I moved here in 2008 to help promote Israeli wines to tourists and for export overseas.
Well, who's the market for Israeli wines? Is it Israelis? Are they drinking more wine now? Or is it like a kosher market that it's exported?
It's a combination of both. Part of the thing with Israeli wines is we're limited if we just go after the kosher market in the world. There's only 14 million Jews in the world. Half those Jews probably don't care if they're having kosher or not. And, there's several billion other wine consumers out there who might want to buy wine from the oldest wine region in the world. This is where Noah, was the first recorded winemaker. King David had vineyards that, are recorded, where he had guards posted. For Christian, the connection between Jesus and wine. The story here of wine is, such a romantic story, that even if we're trying to compare wines dollar to dollar with wines internationally, we definitely have a better story than almost any other place in the world.
Well, tell me about the difference between red wines and white wines. What is Israel known for?
Well, Israel's known for red wines because warmer climates tend to have an easier time making red wines, because red wines rely on ripeness, where white wines rely on the acidity. The white wines. So it's sort of a God's joke on wine drinkers, because when you're in a warmer region, you want chilled white wines. And when you're in a colder region, you want red wines, because they're more robust and they're higher alcohol, so they warm you up. But you're going to have to get it from another region. So it actually creates, it sort of creates a necessity to trade with people and, for an international wine industry to exist.
Well, you brought some wines we're going to taste. Now tell me about this one here, the Bat Shlomo.
Oh, okay. So the Bat Shlomo is an interesting winery. They're in the Zikron Yaakov area. Ari Earl is their winemaker. They're made at the Jezreel Winery. They're sort of a custom crush winery. And one of the things I like about this bottle is it actually has a glass stopper on it. So it's very easy to put the stopper back into the bottle. And this is a Sauvignon Blanc wine. And with Sauvignon Blanc, we're typically looking for citric flavors. You tend to get some grapefruit, maybe some tropical notes of pineapple, but it's also known for its grassiness. It almost smells like cut grass, which is one of the things it's known for, and even some green pepper and maybe some notes of kiwi. All right, so we have the 2011 Barcan Superior Cabernet Sauvignon. It's been oaked in French barrels for about 20 months. Cabernet Sauvignon, typically we get notes, aromas of cassis, blackberries, maybe some raspberry notes, graphite, green pepper possibly, or eucalyptus are possible notes. From the oak aging, we may get chocolate notes, espresso, also tobacco notes.
David, you talk about the various flavors and aromas of the wine, and licorice, chocolate aromas. Where does that come from?
So, well, some of the flavors, like the chocolate and the tobacco, comes from the oak barrels. But what's interesting about wine grapes compared to table grapes is they're a lot more complex. Almost every aroma and flavor you can think of, you could actually find in a wine grape.
Exciting things are happening in Israel in the wine scene. David Rhodes, thanks for being with the IBA News, and we hope to see you back.
It's my pleasure. L'chaim.
In financial news, the shekel today ended the trading week with a mixed performance against all major foreign currencies. And due to the closure of the stock market on Fridays, here's a look at the closing numbers for the week. Having trouble bringing you those numbers. So we'll move to the weather, and the IBA weather team tells us we can expect another beautiful summer day tomorrow with no significant change in temperatures. Thank you for being with us this afternoon. We hope you'll join us again tomorrow, and I'll be back same time, same channel to bring you the latest breaking news from Israel. I'm Erin Viner, wishing you a great evening and Shabbat Shalom from Jerusalem.